So let's take a look at butyric character, a defect of beer, in fact an all too common defect of beer. The butyric character is caused by butyric acid, an acid which generally isn't produced by yeast, but is coming from contaminant bacteria. Now, butyric acid has a rather unusual smell. If you're being positive about it, it may remind you of the smell of an overripe mango. If you're being negative about it, it smells like baby puke or baby vomit. Really not a very appealing character. This flavour is generally produced in the brewhouse. Bacteria which come in with the malt, if they're allowed to grow for too long or at cooler temperatures, they will form butyric acid. Now that butyric acid won't impart a smell to the wort. It's only after the fermentation, when the brewer's yeast has reduced the pH value of the beer, that the butyric acid will become apparent. The other source of the butyric acid can be sugar syrups. For brewers using adjuncts or liquid sugars to brew their beer, defective sugar syrups from growth of bacteria, two types, Bacillus and Clostridium, contain this butyric acid. Once again, you don't smell it in the sugar syrup, but when the yeast reduces the pH value of the beer, the flavour becomes apparent. Now, in addition to giving a very unpleasant flavour to the beer, the baby vomit character, the butyric acid does other things. First of all, it interferes with the metabolism of the yeast. It makes the yeast sick. It makes it less able to get rid of diacetyl that's produced during the fermentation. And those traces diacetyl augment the baby vomit character and make the flavour much worse. It can also reduce the viability of the yeast and give you sluggish fermentations. So that's a reason to avoid it. On the positive side, many yeast strains will convert butyric acid into ethyl butyrate, which smells of tinned pineapple, quite a pleasant flavour. An example where you're getting a good flavour from a problem. Now, because the origins of butyric acid are really in hygiene, it's important to look after your brewhouse hygiene and not to allow wort to remain from one brew to the next. Really, the important areas are around if you have a hold up in the brewhouse, for example, due to a power outage, and you really can't control the time and temperature of the mash stands. Those are the riskiest factors. But you've also got to look at the quality of your sugar syrups to make sure there's no butyric acid. Now, when you're assessing the butyric acid in beer, there are two ways to do it. First of all, to concentrate the butyric acid in the headspace of the beer by sealing the glass with your hand. Cover the glass with your hand and swirl it around. This concentrates the butyric acid. When we then take a 2-second sniff, we'll get the strongest flavour. But we can also do the retronasal technique. That's where we hold our nose with our fingers, breathe in and take the sample into our mouth, and then breathe down through our nose. Let me show you. The butyric flavour comes into our nose from behind, making the flavour much stronger. Now, most beers have got a little bit of butyric acid in them because these bacteria are always present on malt. So they're producing less than 1 milligram per litre of butyric acid, either during brewhouse operations or maybe even during the malting process. And it's only when the concentrations get to about 2, 3 or 4 milligrams per litre do we start to notice a butyric character in the beer. Defective beers, though, can go as high as 10 milligrams per litre, giving a very obnoxious flavour to the beer. Now, because butyric acid is a weak acid, the intensity of the flavour is determined both by the concentration of the flavour and also by the pH value of the beer. So beers with low pH values, beers with higher acidity, have a stronger butyric character than those with a higher beer pH value. So to avoid this flavour, make sure you keep your brewhouse clean. If you're using sugar syrups, use one of the highest quality sugar syrup. And most of all, make sure you screen your raw materials for the presence of butyric acid. When people are tasting this, the flavour they most commonly confuse it with is isovaleric acid, or isovaleric character. That comes from hops, quite a different source. Now, how do you tell the difference? You have to taste both samples side by side. When you do, you'll usually find they are unmistakably different. But until you've learned to do that, you run the risk of confusing them. So the key thing, train on a flavour standard with both butyric acid and isovaleric acid and learn to tell the difference to find this important defect in your beer.